The stagecoach rattled into Placerville, California on a blistering August afternoon in 1872, and Rosalie Lambert knew the moment she heard the chains that her life had become a nightmare far worse than anything she'd imagined when she'd signed that damned contract back in Boston. She sat rigid on the worn leather seat, her wrists bound in iron shackles that bit into her skin with every jostle of the coach, watching the dusty street unfold through the grimy window. The metal felt heavy and wrong, a physical manifestation of the terrible mistake she'd made 3 months ago, when desperation had driven her to respond to an advertisement for a mail-order bride. The man who'd purchased her passage, Marcus Wendell, had seemed respectable in his letters, kind even, but when she'd arrived in Sacramento 2 days prior, everything had changed. "You'll learn your place soon enough," he'd hissed as he'd locked the shackles around her wrists at the Sacramento depot, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. "Cost me good money to bring you all the way from Boston. You're my property now, girl, and I'll make sure you understand that." The other passengers in the coach, a matronly woman and her husband, had averted their eyes when Marcus had forced Rosalie aboard, and she couldn't blame them. In 1872, a woman in chains was either a criminal or someone's chattel, and either way, decent folk didn't want to get involved. Rosalie had tried to speak to explain, but Marcus had grabbed her jaw hard enough to leave bruises and told her that if she made a sound, he'd gag her too. Now the coach was slowing, pulling up to what looked like the main street of Placerville. Through the window, Rosalie could see a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith shop with smoke rising from its chimney. Normal life, continuing as it always had, while her own existence had become something out of a dark fairy tale. "End of the line," the driver called out, and Marcus stood, gripping Rosalie's upper arm hard enough to make her gasp. She stood on shaking legs, the chains clinking as she moved. Her traveling dress, once a respectable navy blue, was rumpled and dusty from the long journey. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins, falling in disheveled waves around her face. Marcus hauled her down from the coach, not bothering to help her navigate the steps. Rosalie stumbled, catching herself at the last moment, and found herself standing in the middle of Placerville's main street with the hot sun beating down and curious eyes turning her way. "Please," she whispered, finally finding her voice now that they were in public. "Please, this is wrong." "You can't just shut your mouth," Marcus snarled, jerking her forward. He was a thick-set man in his late 40s, with a florid face and cold gray eyes. "We're going to my ranch, and you're going to do exactly what I tell you. You signed a contract." "I signed a marriage contract, not a bill of sale," Rosalie said, trying to keep her voice steady even as fear made her hands shake. The chains rattled with her trembling. "This isn't legal. You can't keep me in chains like I'm some kind of animal." Marcus raised his hand, and Rosalie flinched back, but the blow never landed. A hand had caught Marcus's wrist, stopping it mid-swing, and Rosalie looked up to see a man who seemed to have materialized out of nowhere. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who made his living through physical labor. His hair was dark, almost black, and hung a bit longer than was fashionable, brushing the collar of his worn leather vest. His eyes, a striking hazel that shifted between green and gold in the afternoon light, were fixed on Marcus with an expression of barely controlled fury. "I don't think that's how a man treats his wife," the stranger said, his voice low and dangerous. "Or any woman, for that matter." Marcus tried to jerk his arm free, but the stranger's grip was iron. "This is none of your concern, Fuller. She's mine, bought and paid for, and I'll do as I please." "She's a human being, Wendell," the stranger, Fuller, said. His eyes flicked to Rosalie, taking in the chains, the bruises already forming on her jaw, the desperate fear in her eyes. Something shifted in his expression, a flash of protectiveness that made Rosalie's breath catch. "And those chains come off. Now." "Like hell they do," Marcus spat. "She's property, same as livestock. I paid for her passage from Boston, paid for her room and board in Sacramento. She owes me, and I'll keep her however I see fit until that debt's paid." A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Rosalie saw men in dusty work clothes, women in calico dresses, a shopkeeper still wearing his apron. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, but no one stepped forward to help. "That's not how the law works," Fuller said, his voice still dangerously quiet. "You can't keep a woman in chains because she owes you money. That's slavery, and last I checked, we fought a war over that." "She's not a slave. She's a mail-order bride," Marcus argued, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "There are contracts, legal agreements. Show me the contract that says you can shackle her like a prisoner," Fuller challenged. "Show me the law that says a debt makes her your property." Marcus's face flushed an even deeper red. "You're interfering with my business, Fuller. Your ranch is miles from here. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me the moment I see a woman in chains," Fuller said flatly. He released Marcus's wrist and turned his attention to Rosalie. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw, the barely leashed tension in his shoulders. He was younger than Marcus, perhaps in his early 30s, and there was something in his eyes that made Rosalie think he'd seen his share of darkness. "Madam, do you want to be here with this man?" Rosalie's throat tightened. It was the first time anyone had asked her what she wanted since this nightmare began. "No," she whispered, then louder, finding courage in his steady gaze. "No, I don't. He told me in his letters that he needed a wife, that he had a good ranch and wanted a partner. He never said anything about chains or treating me like property. When I arrived in Sacramento, he changed. He said I had to obey him in all things, that I belonged to him now." Fuller's jaw tightened. He turned back to Marcus. "Take the chains off." "I will not," Marcus said stubbornly. "She's mine, and I'm taking her to my ranch. You've got no authority here, Fuller. You're just a rancher like me." "Then we'll get someone with authority," Fuller said. He raised his voice, addressing the crowd. "Someone fetch Sheriff Morrison. We'll let him sort this out." "Sheriff's out of town," called a voice from the crowd. An older man with a weathered face and a deputy's star pinned to his vest stepped forward. "Won't be back until tomorrow evening." "I'm Deputy Carson, and I'll tell you right now, this is a civil matter. If she signed a contract with Wendell, there's not much the law can do." Rosalie felt her heart sink. The deputy's eyes were sympathetic but resigned, as if he'd seen this kind of thing before and knew how it ended. "She's in chains," Fuller said, his voice rising with frustration. "How is that a civil matter?" "Unless she's charged with a crime, those chains aren't legal," Deputy Carson admitted. "But if Wendell removes them, there's still the matter of the contract. If she owes him money for her passage and breaks the agreement, he could sue her for breach of contract. She'd have no way to pay." "I'll pay," Fuller said without hesitation. "Whatever he spent to bring her here, I'll cover it. Every cent." The crowd murmured with surprise, and Rosalie stared at Fuller in shock. Marcus's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why would you do that? You don't even know this woman." "Because it's the right thing to do," Fuller said simply. "You want your money back, Wendell, fine. Take it and walk away. But she's not going with you, and those chains come off right now." Marcus's expression cycled through anger, calculation, and finally greed. $300, he said. "That's what I spent on her passage, her clothes, her room, and board." You give me $300, Fuller, and you can have her. But I want the money now." "That's highway robbery and you know it," Fuller said, but he was already reaching for his pocket. "Her passage from Boston couldn't have cost more than $100, and I know you didn't spend another $200 on anything else." "That's my price," Marcus said smugly. "Take it or leave it." Fuller's hand clenched around something in his pocket, and for a moment Rosalie thought he might hit Marcus after all. But then he pulled out a worn leather billfold and began counting out bills. Rosalie watched in stunned disbelief as he handed over what had to be a substantial portion of his savings to a man who didn't deserve a single cent. "There's your blood money," Fuller said, practically throwing the last bill at Marcus. "Now give me the key to those shackles and get out of my sight." Marcus caught the money, counted it quickly, and then pulled a small key from his vest pocket. He tossed it to Fuller with a sneer. "She's trouble, Fuller. You'll regret this." "I doubt that," Fuller said. He turned to Rosalie and his expression softened. "May I?" He held up the key. Rosalie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She held out her shackled wrists, and Fuller gently unlocked the cuffs. The moment they fell away, Rosalie felt like she could breathe again. The skin underneath was raw and chafed, marked with red welts that would probably bruise. Fuller's expression darkened when he saw the damage. "You should be ashamed," he said to Marcus, not bothering to look at him. "Now get out of here before I forget I'm a civilized man." Marcus stuffed the money into his pocket and stalked away, muttering under his breath. The crowd began to disperse, the show over, and Rosalie found herself standing alone with her unexpected rescuer, rubbing her sore wrists and trying to make sense of what had just happened. "Thank you," she finally managed. "I don't know how to thank you properly." "You just paid $300 for a complete stranger." Fuller shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Couldn't stand by and watch that. No man has the right to treat a woman that way, contract or no contract." He studied her for a moment, taking in her exhausted, frightened face. "You got anywhere to go? Any family in California?" Rosalie shook her head. "No, I came from Boston. I'm alone." The words tasted bitter. "I was a seamstress there, but work was scarce and my landlady was threatening to throw me out. When I saw the advertisement for mail-order brides, I thought it was my only option. I thought I was coming here to marry a decent man and build a life. I should have known better." "You shouldn't have to know better," Fuller said firmly. "Men like Wendell should be horsewhipped. Look, I've got a ranch about 5 miles outside town. It's not much, just me and a couple of hired hands, but we've got a spare room. You're welcome to stay there until you figure out what you want to do next. No strings attached," he added quickly, seeing her hesitation. "You've been through enough." "I'm not asking for anything in return." Rosalie wanted to accept, but years of being taught to be cautious held her back. "I don't even know your name." "Grant Fuller," he said, holding out his hand. "I run a cattle ranch west of here. Been in California since '67, came out from Missouri after the war." Rosalie shook his hand, noting the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip that was somehow gentle at the same time. "Rosalie Lambert, and I appreciate your offer more than you know, but I can't impose on you like that. You've already done so much." "Where else are you going to go?" Grant asked practically. "You said yourself you've got no family here, and Wendell cleaned out whatever money you might have had. The boarding house in town isn't cheap, and you'd need work to pay for it." He hesitated, then added, "If you're worried about propriety, my housekeeper lives on the property too. Her name's Martha, been with me since I bought the place. She's getting on in years and could use some help. If you're willing to help her with cooking and mending and such, we could call it even. You'd earn your keep, and you'd have time to figure out your next step." It was more than generous. It was a lifeline thrown to her when she was drowning. Rosalie searched Grant's face, looking for any sign of ulterior motives, but all she saw was genuine concern and a stubborn determination to help. "All right," she said quietly. "But only until I can find proper work and a place of my own. I won't be a burden." "You won't be," Grant assured her. He glanced around the street, then back at her. "I've got some business to finish up at the general store, then we can head out. Are you hungry? There's a decent restaurant next to the hotel." Rosalie's stomach chose that moment to growl, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since a stale biscuit early that morning. She felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. "I haven't got any money." "My treat," Grant said easily. "Come on. You look like you could use a proper meal and a moment to sit down somewhere that's not a stagecoach." He offered his arm, a gesture so courtly and unexpected that Rosalie felt tears prick her eyes. She took it, grateful for the support, and let him guide her down the dusty street toward the restaurant. Behind them, the shackles lay in the dirt where they'd fallen, and Rosalie didn't look back. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. Grant led her to a corner table, away from the curious stares of the other diners, and pulled out her chair before seating himself across from her. "Order whatever you like," he said when the waitress, a plump woman with kind eyes, came to take their request. Rosalie ordered roast chicken with potatoes and vegetables, suddenly ravenous now that she was safe and the immediate danger had passed. Grant ordered the same, along with coffee for both of them. "So," he said once the waitress had left, "Boston, that's a long way from California." "A lifetime away," Rosalie agreed. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup the waitress had brought, savoring the warmth. "I was born there. My parents died when I was 16. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I had to make my own way after that. I found work as a seamstress, did alterations and repairs, some dressmaking when I could get the commissions. It was enough to get by, barely, but then the shop where I worked closed down. The owner retired and moved to live with his daughter. I tried to find other work, but there were too many women and not enough jobs. I got behind on my rent and then—" She trailed off, not wanting to relive the desperation that had driven her to answer that advertisement. "And then you saw Wendell's ad," Grant finished. "Did he say anything in his letters about how he'd treat you?" "No," Rosalie said bitterly. "His letters were full of promises. He said he had a good ranch, that he needed a wife to help run it. He talked about building a future together, having children, growing old in California. He seemed educated, kind. I thought I was making a smart choice." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm 23 years old and I nearly threw my life away because I was too desperate to see the truth." 23 isn't old," Grant said. "And you didn't throw anything away, you survived. That takes strength." Rosalie looked at him, really looked at him. In the soft light of the restaurant, she could see that his hazel eyes held shadows of their own old pain that he carried quietly. "You fought in the war," she said. "It wasn't a question." Grant nodded slowly. "Missouri Cavalry, Union side. I was just 18 when I enlisted. Saw things no one should have to see. Did things I still have nightmares about. When it was over, I couldn't go back home. Too many ghosts, too many memories. So I came west, started over. Bought my ranch with my mustering out pay and what I'd saved during the war. It's been 5 years and I'm finally starting to feel like I belong somewhere again." "Is that why you helped me?" Rosalie asked softly. "Because you know what it's like to need a fresh start." "Maybe partly," Grant admitted. "But mostly I helped you because it was the right thing to do. My mother raised me to respect women, to protect those who can't protect themselves. When I saw you in those chains—" His jaw tightened. "I've seen men in chains. Prisoners of war, criminals, slaves before emancipation. No one deserves that, but especially not someone whose only crime was being desperate enough to trust the wrong man. Their food arrived, and they ate in companionable silence for a while. Rosalie hadn't realized how hungry she'd been until the first bite of chicken hit her tongue. It was simple fare but delicious, and she found herself relaxing for the first time in days. "What's your ranch like?" she asked when her plate was half empty and her stomach had stopped its urgent demands. Grant's face brightened. "It's beautiful country. Rolling hills, good grass for the cattle, a creek that runs year-round. The house isn't fancy, just a simple ranch house with 4 bedrooms and a good-sized kitchen. There's a barn, a stable, a chicken coop. I've got about 300 head of cattle right now, hoping to increase that to 500 by next year. I've got 2 hands working for me full-time, good men both of them. Jake's been with me since the beginning, and Tommy signed on last spring." "It sounds wonderful," Rosalie said, and meant it. She tried to imagine what it would be like, living on a ranch, waking up to open spaces and clean air instead of the cramped, smoky streets of Boston. "It's a good life," Grant said. "Hard work, but honest. I like being my own boss, building something that's mine, and the land out here." He gestured vaguely toward the window. "It's different from Missouri, bigger somehow. Like there's room to breathe, room to be whoever you want to be." "I'd like to see it," Rosalie said. Then, worried that sounded too forward, she added quickly, "Your ranch, I mean, if you're sure about your offer." "I'm sure," Grant said firmly. "Finish your meal and we'll head out. I want to get back before dark if we can. The road's safe enough, but I prefer traveling in daylight." They finished eating, and Grant paid the bill over Rosalie's protests. Then he escorted her to the general store, where he picked up supplies, flour and sugar and coffee, nails and rope and other sundries that a rancher needed. The proprietor, a balding man with wire-rimmed spectacles, eyed Rosalie curiously but didn't ask questions. Grant's wagon was hitched outside, a sturdy flatbed pulled by 2 horses. He loaded the supplies, then helped Rosalie up onto the bench seat. She settled her skirts around her, conscious of how rumpled and dirty she must look after days of travel. Grant climbed up beside her, took up the reins, and clicked his tongue to the horses. They rolled out of Placerville, heading west, leaving the bustle of the town behind. The road was rutted but passable, winding through hills covered in dry grass and scattered oak trees. The afternoon sun beat down, making Rosalie grateful for the bonnet she'd managed to hold onto through all her troubles. "It gets hot out here in August," Grant said, as if reading her thoughts. "But the house stays cool, thick adobe walls, and it's cooler by the creek." "How far is your ranch from town?" Rosalie asked. "About 5 miles. We should be there in less than an hour." Grant glanced at her. "You can rest if you want. You look exhausted." Rosalie was exhausted, bone-deep tired in a way that went beyond physical weariness. But she was also wide awake, her nerves still jangling from everything that had happened. "I don't think I could sleep right now if I tried. My mind won't settle." "That's understandable," Grant said. "You've been through hell. Give yourself time to process it." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the clopping of hooves, and the buzz of insects in the grass. Rosalie found herself stealing glances at Grant, trying to understand this man who had so casually upended his life to save a stranger. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, she decided. Not pretty boy handsome like the dandies who used to come into the dress shop, but strong-featured and masculine, with a straight nose and a firm jaw. His hands on the reins were competent and sure, and there was something about the way he sat, relaxed but alert, that spoke of confidence and capability. "Why aren't you married?" she asked, then immediately regretted the forward question. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. But Grant didn't seem offended. I was engaged once back in Missouri. Girl named Sarah, we grew up together. I proposed before I went off to war and she said yes, but when I came back. He paused, his expression distant. I wasn't the same person who'd left. The war changed me. I had nightmares. I'd startle at loud noises I couldn't settle. Sarah tried to understand, but she couldn't. Finally, she broke it off. Said she'd fallen in love with the boy I used to be, but that boy was gone. She married a banker the next year. I'm sorry, Rosalie said softly. Grant shrugged. It was for the best. She deserved someone who could give her a normal life, and I couldn't be that man. Not then, maybe not ever. When I came to California, I decided I was better off alone. Romance and ranching don't mix well anyway. But you must get lonely, Rosalie ventured. Sometimes, Grant admitted. But lonely is better than making someone else miserable by asking them to live with my demons. Rosalie wanted to argue, to tell him that he seemed like a good man who deserved happiness, but she didn't know him well enough to say such things. Instead, she turned her attention to the landscape, watching the hills roll by. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a glint of water that must be the creek Grant had mentioned, then as buildings resolving out of the heat shimmer. The house was indeed adobe, long and low with a covered porch running along the front. The barn was larger than Rosalie had expected, a sturdy wooden structure with a hayloft. There were several corrals, one holding horses, another empty but clearly meant for cattle. Chickens scratched in the dirt near a small coop, and Rosalie could see vegetable gardens behind the house. It was beautiful in a stark, practical way. This was a working ranch, not a showplace, but there was something deeply appealing about the orderly buildings and the sweep of land stretching in all directions. Grant pulled the wagon up in front of the house, and before he'd even set the brake, the front door opened and a woman emerged. She was in her 60s, Rosalie guessed, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face weathered by years of sun and hard work. But her eyes were sharp and kind, and she smiled when she saw Grant. "You're back earlier than I expected," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. Then she noticed Rosalie and her eyebrows rose. "And you've brought company." "Martha, this is Rosalie Lambert," Grant said, climbing down from the wagon. He came around to help Rosalie down, his hands gentle on her waist. "She's going to be staying with us for a while." "Rosalie, this is Martha Hayes, my housekeeper and the person who actually keeps this place running." Martha's sharp eyes took in Rosalie's rumpled dress, the bruises on her jaw, the raw skin on her wrists. Her expression softened immediately. "Looks like you've had a rough time of it, dear. Come inside and we'll get you settled. Grant, bring in the supplies when you get a chance." "Yes, madam," Grant said with a small grin that transformed his serious face. Clearly, Martha ran the household and Grant was smart enough not to argue. Martha ushered Rosalie into the house, and Rosalie found herself in a large, airy room that served as both kitchen and dining area. A long wooden table dominated the center, and a massive cast iron stove stood against one wall. The floor was packed earth covered with woven rugs, and the walls were decorated with simple curtains and a few pieces of folk art. It was spare but clean, comfortable in its simplicity. "The bedrooms are through here," Martha said, leading Rosalie down a short hallway. She opened a door to reveal a small but pleasant room with a single bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser with a wash basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out toward the creek. "This'll be yours. It's not fancy, but the bed's comfortable and you'll have privacy." "It's perfect," Rosalie said, her voice tight with emotion. After the nightmare of the past few days, this simple room felt like sanctuary. "Thank you, Martha. I can't tell you how grateful I am." Grant told me a bit about what happened, Martha said gently. You just rest and don't worry about anything for now. I'll bring you some hot water so you can wash up and then you should sleep. You look dead on your feet. Rosalie wanted to protest that she should help, that she shouldn't be treated like a guest when she was supposed to be earning her keep, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. Just for a little while, she compromised. Then I want to help with supper. Martha smiled. We'll see. If you're still awake later, you can help. If not, there'll be plenty of work tomorrow. True to her word, Martha returned a few minutes later with a pitcher of hot water and some soft cloths. She also brought a clean nightgown, simple white cotton that looked like it would fit reasonably well. This was mine when I was younger and slimmer, Martha said with a wry smile. You're welcome to it until we can make you some proper clothes. After Martha left, Rosalie stripped off her travel-stained dress and washed away days of grime and fear. The hot water on her sore wrists stung but felt cleansing, as if she could wash away the memory of the chains along with the physical dirt. She slipped into the borrowed nightgown, pulled back the quilt on the bed and lay down, intending to rest for just a few minutes. She woke to darkness and the sound of crickets chirping outside her window. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then memory flooded back. The chains, Grant breaking them, the ride to the ranch. She sat up, realizing she'd slept for hours. The room was lit by moonlight streaming through the window, bright enough to see by. Rosalie got up and padded to the door, opening it carefully. The house was quiet but not silent. She could hear the low murmur of voices from the main room, and the smell of something savory cooking made her stomach growl despite the big lunch she'd eaten. She found her dress, shook it out and put it back on, wincing at how wrinkled it was. She'd have to do something about her wardrobe situation soon. She couldn't keep wearing the same travel-stained dress day after day. When she emerged into the main room, she found Grant and Martha sitting at the table, along with two other men she didn't recognize. They all looked up when she appeared. Sleeping Beauty awakens, Martha said with a warm smile. Come sit down, dear. We saved you some supper. Grant stood, pulling out a chair for her. Rosalie, these are my ranch hands, Jake Morrison and Tommy Chen. Jake was a weathered man in his 40s with a grizzled beard and friendly eyes. Tommy was younger, perhaps Rosalie's age, with black hair and Asian features. Both men nodded politely. Madam, Jake said, welcome to the ranch. Thank you, Rosalie said, taking the offered chair. Martha set a plate in front of her, loaded with beef stew and fresh bread. I'm sorry I slept so long. I meant to help with supper. Nonsense, Martha said firmly. You needed the rest. There'll be plenty of time for work later. As Rosalie ate, the conversation at the table resumed. The men were discussing the cattle, planning the next day's work. Rosalie learned that they were preparing to drive part of the herd to market in Sacramento in a few weeks, and there was much to be done before then. We'll need to round up the strays from the north pasture, Jake was saying. Tommy and I can handle that, but it'd be easier with a third rider. I'll come with you, Grant said. Martha, will you and Rosalie be all right here for a few days? Of course, Martha said. We managed before you brought home strays. We can manage now. But her tone was affectionate, and she winked at Rosalie to show she was teasing. After supper, Jake and Tommy said their good nights and headed to the bunkhouse. Martha began clearing the table, and Rosalie quickly stood to help despite the older woman's protests. If I'm going to stay here, I'm going to work, Rosalie said firmly. I'm not an invalid and I don't intend to be a freeloader. Martha studied her for a moment, then nodded approvingly. All right then, you can dry while I wash. Grant excused himself to check on the horses, leaving the two women to their work. As they washed and dried the dishes, Martha asked gentle questions about Rosalie's background, her skills, her life in Boston. Rosalie found herself opening up, telling Martha things she'd barely admitted to herself about how lonely she'd been, how frightening it was to be a woman alone in a big city with no family and no security. "You're safe here," Martha said when Rosalie had finished. "Grant's a good man. The best I've known. He'll never let anyone hurt you." "I don't understand why he helped me," Rosalie admitted. "He spent $300 on a complete stranger. That's a fortune." "That's just who he is," Martha said. "He sees someone in trouble and he can't walk away. It's gotten him into scrapes before, but I've never known him to regret it." She paused, then added, "He's lonely, though he'd never admit it. This ranch, it's his whole life. He pours everything into it. But a man needs more than work and land." Rosalie felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not looking for a husband, Martha. I just escaped from one terrible situation. I'm not eager to jump into another." "I'm not suggesting you should," Martha said mildly. "I'm just saying, keep an open mind. Grant's nothing like that monster Wendell. And sometimes the best things in life come when we're not looking for them." Before Rosalie could respond, Grant returned, stamping dust off his boots at the door. "Horses are settled for the night," he announced. "Martha, I'll be riding out at first light with Jake and Tommy. We'll be gone 3 or 4 days. I'll have breakfast ready before dawn," Martha promised. Grant turned to Rosalie. "Will you be all right here? I know you just arrived and I don't like the idea of leaving you so soon, but this work can't wait." "I'll be fine," Rosalie assured him. "Martha and I will keep each other company." Grant nodded, but he still looked uncertain. "If Wendell comes around, he won't," Martha interrupted. "Marcus Wendell is a coward and a bully. He won't risk facing you again, and he knows better than to mess with me." She patted the pocket of her apron, and Rosalie realized with a start that there was a gun tucked in there. Grant grinned. "That's what I figured. All right then. I'll see you ladies in a few days." He bid them good night and headed to his own room. Martha and Rosalie finished tidying the kitchen. Then Martha showed Rosalie where everything was kept so she could help with breakfast in the morning. "Get some more sleep," Martha advised. "Tomorrow we'll start getting you properly settled. You'll need more clothes for one thing. I've got fabric and a sewing machine. We can make you some practical dresses." Rosalie's face lit up. "I'm a seamstress by trade. I'd be happy to help, and I can make my own clothes if you'll let me use your supplies." "Well, that's convenient," Martha said with a chuckle. "Looks like Grant picked the right stray to bring home this time." Rosalie went to bed feeling more settled than she had in months. The room was comfortable, the bed soft, and through the open window she could hear the peaceful sounds of the ranch at night. The horses moving in their stalls, the distant lowing of cattle, the creek burbling over stones. It was so different from Boston, from the rattle of carriages and the shouts of street vendors and the constant press of humanity. She thought about Grant, about the way he'd stood up to Marcus Wendell without hesitation, the way he'd broken those chains and told her she was no one's property. She thought about his sad story of lost love and his belief that he was better off alone. He was wrong about that, Rosalie thought as she drifted off to sleep. Everyone deserved love and happiness, even haunted war veterans who'd forgotten how to dream of such things. But that wasn't her problem to solve. She was here to rebuild her own life, not to rescue anyone else. Still, as sleep claimed her, her last thoughts were of hazel eyes and gentle hands and the sound of chains breaking. The next few days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Rosalie rose early each morning to help Martha with breakfast. Though the first morning it was just the two of them since Grant, and the ranch hands had already ridden out. The days were busy with household chores. Cooking, cleaning, tending the chickens, working in the vegetable garden, and best of all for Rosalie, sewing. Martha had a good stock of fabric, and she was generous about sharing it. Together, they made Rosalie 3 practical dresses, simple calico in different colors that would hold up to daily wear. Rosalie's skilled fingers made quick work of the sewing, and Martha was impressed with her neat stitches and eye for fit. "You weren't lying about being a seamstress," Martha said, examining one of the finished dresses. "This is fine work." "I always loved sewing," Rosalie said. "There's something satisfying about taking plain fabric and turning it into something useful and beautiful." As they worked, Martha told Rosalie about the ranch, about how Grant had built it up from almost nothing. "When he bought this land, there was just a shack and some scrubby cattle," Martha said. "He worked dawn to dusk for years, building the house, the barn, buying better stock. I came on 3 years ago when my husband died and I needed work. Grant gave me a place to live and a purpose. This ranch, it saved me just like it saved him." "Maybe it can save me too," Rosalie said softly. "Maybe it already has," Martha replied. On the 4th day, Grant and the ranch hands returned, dusty and tired but in good spirits. They'd successfully rounded up the strays and moved them to a closer pasture. That evening at supper, Rosalie sat with the whole household for the first time, and she realized with a start that she felt like she belonged. Grant noticed her new dresses and complimented her on them. "You do good work," he said. "Martha's been bragging about your sewing skills." "I enjoy it," Rosalie said. "It feels good to be useful again." "You're more than useful," Grant said, and there was something in his eyes that made Rosalie's heart skip. "You're welcome here, Rosalie. I hope you know that. This isn't just about you earning your keep. You're part of this household now." The words warmed her more than they should have. She'd been at the ranch less than a week, but already it felt more like home than Boston ever had. As the days turned into weeks, Rosalie settled into her new life. She helped Martha with all the household tasks, and she discovered that she loved the work. There was something deeply satisfying about cooking meals from scratch, about tending the garden and watching things grow, about the physical tiredness at the end of each day that came from honest labor. She also discovered that she enjoyed the ranch itself. In her free time, she would walk down to the creek and sit on the bank, watching the water flow and listening to the birds. Sometimes, she would see Grant working with the horses in the corral, and she found herself watching him more and more. He was a natural horseman, patient and firm with the animals. He never raised his voice or used his strength to bully them into obedience. Instead, he worked with them, earned their trust. Rosalie thought there was something beautiful about it, the way man and animal moved together. Grant caught her watching one day and smiled, waving her over. "Want to learn to ride?" he called. Rosalie's immediate instinct was to refuse. Ladies didn't ride, not really, not like the ranch hands did. But then she thought about her new life, about how different it was from Boston, and she found herself nodding. Grant introduced her to a gentle mare named Daisy, a pretty chestnut with a white blaze. "She's the calmest horse we've got," he said. "Perfect for a beginner." He showed Rosalie how to approach the horse, how to let Daisy smell her hand and get comfortable with her presence. Then he brought out a saddle, a lady's side saddle that Martha sometimes used. "I don't know if this will fit you," he said. "Martha's a bit taller, but we can try." The saddle fit well enough, and with Grant's help, Rosalie mounted for the first time. She felt absurdly high up, perched on Daisy's broad back, and she gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles. "Relax," Grant said, his hand on her knee steadying her. "Daisy can feel your tension. Just breathe and trust her." Rosalie forced herself to breathe deeply, and gradually she felt her muscles unclench. Grant led Daisy around the corral at a walk, keeping a hand on the mare's bridle, and after a few circuits, Rosalie began to feel more confident. "You're a natural," Grant said. By the end of summer, you'll be riding out to check on cattle with the rest of us." The thought delighted Rosalie more than it should have. The idea of galloping across open land, free and unrestrained, was intoxicating. She practiced riding every afternoon after that, and Grant was always patient with her, teaching her how to guide Daisy with the reins, how to sit properly, how to move with the horse's gait. Sometimes their hands would brush as he adjusted her grip on the reins, and Rosalie would feel a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with horses. She was falling for him. She knew it and couldn't seem to stop it. Grant was everything Marcus Wendell wasn't: kind, respectful, honest, hardworking. He treated her like an equal, valued her opinions, made her laugh. And there were moments when she'd catch him looking at her with an expression that made her think maybe, just maybe, he felt something too. But he never said anything, never made a move beyond friendship. Rosalie told herself it was for the best. She'd come to California to escape one bad romantic situation. She didn't need to leap into another one. Even if Grant was nothing like Marcus, even if her feelings for him were real and deep and growing stronger every day, she needed to be cautious. Summer deepened into early fall. The cattle drive to Sacramento was successful, and Grant returned with money to invest back into the ranch. He bought more cattle, repaired the barn roof, and even surprised Martha and Rosalie with fabric for new winter dresses from a shop in the city. "You didn't have to do that," Rosalie protested, but she was delighted by the gift: soft wool in deep blue that would be perfect for the cooler weather ahead. "I wanted to," Grant said simply. "You've been working hard. You deserve something nice." It was mid-September, and Rosalie had been at the ranch for over a month when Marcus Wendell showed up. Rosalie was in the vegetable garden, harvesting tomatoes, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She looked up to see a familiar figure riding toward the house, and her blood ran cold. She dropped the basket of tomatoes and ran for the house. "Martha," she called. "Martha, it's Wendell." Martha appeared in the doorway, took one look at Marcus riding up, and her face hardened. "Get inside," she ordered Rosalie, "and stay there." But Rosalie didn't want to hide. She'd spent too much of her life being afraid. So she stood on the porch next to Martha, her chin raised defiantly as Marcus dismounted. He looked the same as before, thick and florid with cold gray eyes. But now those eyes were bloodshot, and he swayed slightly as he walked, clearly drunk. "Well, well," he slurred, "if it isn't my runaway bride, I've come to collect what's mine." "I'm not yours," Rosalie said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Grant Fuller paid you $300. You have no claim on me." "That was a mistake," Marcus said. "I've thought about it, and I've decided that wasn't a fair price. I want more money, or I want you back. Fuller cheated me." "Grant cheated no one," Martha said sharply. "You named your price and he paid it. Now get off this property before I shoot you for trespassing." Marcus laughed, an ugly sound. "You're not going to shoot me, old woman. Where is Fuller anyway? Hiding like a coward." "I'm right here," came Grant's voice from behind them. Rosalie turned to see him emerging from the barn, Jake and Tommy flanking him. Grant's face was calm, but his eyes were hard as flint. "And I suggest you get back on your horse and ride out, Wendell, before this gets ugly." "You owe me," Marcus insisted, taking a step toward the porch. "That woman is mine by right. I paid for her passage. I have a contract she signed under false pretenses," Grant interrupted. "You lied to her in your letters, Wendell. She came here expecting a husband, not a master. That contract isn't worth the paper it's written on." "The law might say different," Marcus blustered. "Then take it to court," Grant said. "File a lawsuit. But you won't, because you know you'll lose. Now I'm going to say this one more time: get off my land." Marcus's face purpled with rage. "You think you're some kind of hero." You're nothing but a do-gooder fool, Fuller. That woman will bring you nothing but trouble. She's not worth what you paid for her." "Don't talk about her like she's livestock," Grant said, his voice dangerously quiet. He took a step forward and Jake and Tommy moved with him. "In fact, don't talk about her at all. She's under my protection now, and if you come near her again, I'll make you regret it." Marcus looked at the three men, clearly calculated his odds, and came up lacking. "This isn't over," he said, but he was already backing toward his horse. "Yes, it is," Grant said. "If I see you on my property again, I'll have you arrested, and spread the word in town. Rosalie Lambert is part of my household. Anyone who bothers her answers to me." Marcus mounted his horse clumsily and rode off, muttering threats under his breath. They all watched until he was out of sight, and then Rosalie felt her knees go weak. Grant was beside her in an instant, his arm around her waist, supporting her. "It's all right," he murmured. "He's gone. He won't be back." "He's right, though," Rosalie said, her voice shaking. "I've brought you nothing but trouble. $300 and now threats from a vengeful drunk. You should never have helped me." "Don't say that," Grant said fiercely. He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "Don't ever say that. Helping you was the best decision I've made in years." Rosalie looked up into his eyes and saw raw emotion there, feelings he'd been hiding for weeks. "Grant," she whispered. "I didn't want this," he said, the words tumbling out as if a dam had broken. "I told myself I was just helping someone in need, that it didn't mean anything. But I was lying. From the moment I saw you in those chains, something inside me woke up, something I thought was dead. And these past weeks, watching you laugh with Martha, seeing you learn to ride, eating meals with you every night. Rosalie, I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I've already fallen. And I know that's not fair. I know you came here to escape from one man trying to control you, and I have no right to burden you with my feelings." Rosalie cut him off by standing on her toes and pressing her lips to his. It was a bold move, perhaps too bold, but she couldn't listen to him torture himself any longer. His lips were warm and slightly chapped, and for a moment he froze in surprise. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he kissed her back with a passion that took her breath away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rosalie saw Martha grinning from the doorway while Jake and Tommy were trying very hard to look like they'd seen nothing. "For what it's worth," Rosalie said, her hands still on Grant's chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palms, "I'm falling in love with you too. Maybe I have been since you broke those chains. You gave me my freedom, Grant. You didn't demand anything in return. You've treated me with respect and kindness, like I'm a person worth knowing, not just a commodity to be bought and sold. How could I not fall in love with you?" Grant's smile was like the sun coming out after a storm. "So where does that leave us?" "I don't know," Rosalie admitted. "I don't want to rush into anything. I made that mistake once before and it nearly destroyed me, but I'd like to see where this goes, if you're willing to be patient with me." "I'll wait as long as you need," Grant said solemnly. "We'll court properly, take our time, do things right. And if you ever want to leave, if you decide this isn't what you want, I'll help you get wherever you want to go, no questions asked." "I'm not going anywhere," Rosalie said. "This ranch, this life, this is where I want to be." Martha called out from the porch. "Are you two going to stand there mooning at each other all day, or are we going to have lunch? I didn't cook all morning just to let the food get cold." Grant laughed and took Rosalie's hand, lacing their fingers together. "Come on. I think we've given the household enough drama for one day." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Rosalie felt like she was floating. Everything that had seemed so dark and hopeless just weeks ago had transformed into something beautiful. She had a home, work she loved, friends who cared about her, and now, maybe, a chance at real love. The rest of the fall passed in a golden haze. Grant courted Rosalie with old-fashioned propriety, with rides to town for church socials, with quiet conversations on the porch in the evening, with small, thoughtful gifts like wildflowers left on her pillow, or a book of poetry he'd ordered from Sacramento. They were careful not to compromise her reputation, always making sure Martha was nearby as a chaperone. But there were stolen moments, kisses in the barn or by the creek, where they could express their growing love. Rosalie had never been happier. She felt like she was becoming the person she was always meant to be. The frightened, desperate woman who'd arrived in chains seemed like a distant memory. In her place was someone confident and capable, someone who could ride a horse, shoot a rifle, help birth a calf. Someone who was loved and valued. Grant was equally transformed. The sad, lonely rancher who thought he was better off alone now smiled easily and laughed often. Martha said she hadn't seen him this happy since before the war, and Rosalie took secret pride in knowing she'd helped heal his wounded heart. In November, as the weather turned cool and the leaves on the oak trees blazed gold and red, Grant took Rosalie on a ride to the farthest edge of his property. They stopped on a hilltop overlooking the ranch, the house and barn tiny in the distance, the creek a silver ribbon winding through the land. "I wanted to show you this," Grant said, dismounting and helping Rosalie down from Daisy. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch. I come here when I need to think, to remember what I'm working for." "It's beautiful," Rosalie said, looking out over the vista of rolling hills and endless sky. "Rosalie," Grant said, and something in his voice made her turn to look at him. He was holding a small box, and her heart began to pound. "I know we said we'd take things slow, and I meant that. But I also know what I feel, and I know it's not going to change. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I want to build a future with you, have children with you, grow old with you." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "This was my mother's ring. She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to a woman worthy of it. Rosalie Lambert, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my love?" Tears streamed down Rosalie's face, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Grant slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Rosalie felt like her heart might burst with happiness. They rode back to the ranch in a state of euphoric disbelief, and when they announced their engagement, Martha hugged them both and declared that she'd known from the start they were meant for each other. Jake and Tommy offered their congratulations, and that evening they had a celebratory dinner with Martha's best cooking, and even a bottle of wine that Grant had been saving for a special occasion. "When's the wedding?" Martha asked. "Soon," Grant said, looking at Rosalie. "Unless you want a big fancy affair. I can wait if that's what you want." "I don't need fancy," Rosalie said. "I just need you. What about Christmas? We could be married on Christmas Day." "That would be perfect," Grant agreed. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Rosalie made herself a wedding dress, cream-colored silk that Grant had bought for her in Sacramento, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Martha helped her make a veil from fine netting, and they decorated the house with evergreen boughs and ribbons. On Christmas morning, 1872, Rosalie woke before dawn in her little room for the last time. By evening, she'd be sleeping in Grant's room in Grant's bed as his wife. The thought made her nervous and excited in equal measure. Martha helped her dress, fixing her hair in an elaborate updo with small white flowers tucked into the curls. When Rosalie looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked radiant, happy, loved. The wedding was held in the main room of the house, with the justice of the peace from Placerville officiating. Jake and Tommy stood up as witnesses, and Martha cried happy tears throughout the whole ceremony. Grant wore his best suit, a dark gray that made his hazel eyes look almost green, and when he looked at Rosalie, the love in his gaze was so intense it made her breath catch. "Do you, Grant Samuel Fuller, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the justice asked. "I do," Grant said firmly. "And do you, Rosalie Ann Lambert, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Rosalie said, her voice clear and strong. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of California, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Grant pulled Rosalie into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of their small audience. When they broke apart, both were grinning like fools. They celebrated with a feast that Martha had been preparing for days. Roast turkey, potatoes, vegetables from their own garden, fresh bread, pies made from preserved fruit. It was simple but delicious, and Rosalie thought she'd never tasted anything so good. After dinner, Jake and Tommy tactfully announced they were heading into town for the evening, and Martha retired to her room with a knowing smile. Grant and Rosalie were left alone in the main room, suddenly shy with each other despite months of courtship. "Mrs. Fuller," Grant said softly, testing out the name. "How does that sound?" "Perfect," Rosalie said. "Everything about this is perfect." Grant took her hand and led her to their bedroom. He'd lit candles and the room was warm and inviting. "If you're nervous," he said, "we can wait." "We don't have to," Rosalie silenced him with a kiss. "I'm not nervous," she lied. Then, more honestly, "All right, I'm a little nervous, but I want this. I want you." Grant was gentle with her, patient and tender. And if there was some awkwardness, there was also laughter and joy and overwhelming love. Afterwards, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, Rosalie thought about how far she'd come. 5 months ago, she'd arrived in California in chains, terrified and alone. Now she was married to a good man, living on a beautiful ranch, surrounded by people who cared about her. It seemed almost impossible, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Grant murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Rosalie Fuller." "You saved my life," Rosalie said. "You saved mine right back," Grant replied. Winter passed into spring, and spring into summer. Rosalie threw herself into her new role as rancher's wife with enthusiasm. She learned all aspects of running the ranch, from keeping the books to helping with calving season. She and Martha became true friends, more like mother and daughter than employer and employee. Jake and Tommy treated her with affectionate respect, and the ranch prospered under Grant's careful management. In the fall of 1873, Rosalie discovered she was pregnant. Grant was over the moon with joy, already planning expansions to the house to make room for a nursery. Martha clucked over Rosalie like a mother hen, making sure she rested and ate properly. The pregnancy was not easy. Rosalie suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and as her belly grew, the summer heat became oppressive. But Grant was endlessly patient, bringing her cool water, rubbing her aching feet, holding her when she cried from exhaustion and discomfort. Their son was born on a warm May evening in 1874, after a long and difficult labor that left Rosalie exhausted but elated. Grant held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and Rosalie knew she'd never seen anything more beautiful than her strong cowboy reduced to joyful weeping by the sight of his child. They named him Samuel, after Grant's father, and he was perfect. dark hair like Grant's, but with Rosalie's blue eyes and delicate features. Martha was a doting grandmother in all but name, and even the ranch hands turned soft and silly when Sam was around. Rosalie had never known she could love so deeply, so fiercely. Watching Grant with their son, seeing him rock Sam to sleep or play with him on the floor, made her fall in love with her husband all over again. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic with a baby in the house, but deeply satisfying. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Grant bought more land, expanded the herd, built a new, larger barn. Rosalie started taking in sewing work from women in town, making dresses and alterations, earning her own money and enjoying the creative outlet. 2 years after Sam was born, Rosalie gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Clara. The pregnancy had been a surprise. 1 baby was expected, but 2 was a shock, and the birth was even more difficult than Sam's had been. Grant had been beside himself with worry, pacing outside the bedroom while Martha and the midwife helped Rosalie through the ordeal. But in the end, both babies were healthy, and Rosalie recovered quickly. Grant hired a young woman from town to help Martha with the household work, so Rosalie wouldn't be overwhelmed, and somehow they managed the chaos of 3 young children. The years flew by in a blur of milestones and memories. Sam's first steps, the twins learning to talk, family picnics by the creek, Christmas celebrations with the whole household. Grant and Rosalie grew together, their love deepening with each passing year, weathering the inevitable challenges of marriage and parenthood with patience and humor. In 1879, 7 years after their wedding, Rosalie found herself standing on the same hilltop where Grant had proposed, watching her husband teach Sam to rope a fence post. The boy was 6 now, tall for his age and already showing signs of becoming a skilled rancher like his father. The twins were playing nearby, building elaborate structures out of wildflowers. Martha had passed away peacefully in her sleep the previous winter, and they all still felt her absence keenly. But they'd honored her memory by naming their 4th child, another daughter born just months before Martha died after her. Little Martha, or Mattie as they called her, was toddling around at Rosalie's feet, chattering in the incomprehensible way of 2-year-olds. "Mama, look," Emma called, holding up a flower crown she'd made. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Rosalie said, settling onto the grass and pulling Mattie into her lap. Clara immediately abandoned her own project to climb onto Rosalie's other side. Grant finished his lesson with Sam and walked over to join them, sinking down onto the grass and stretching out his long legs with a satisfied sigh. At 38, he had some silver in his dark hair and lines around his eyes, but Rosalie thought he was more handsome than ever. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, seeing her thoughtful expression. "Just remembering," Rosalie said. "Remember that first day, when you broke my chains and told me I was no one's property?" "Of course I remember," Grant said. "Best day of my life." "Mine too," Rosalie said. "Though at the time I thought it was the worst. I was so scared, so lost. I couldn't imagine feeling safe again, let alone happy." "And now," Grant prompted. "Now I have everything I never dared to dream of," Rosalie said simply. "A home, a family, a man who loves me as an equal partner." "You gave me that, Grant. You gave me myself back. You gave me just as much," Grant said softly. He reached out and took her hand the same way he had that first day in Placerville, only now her hand bore a wedding ring and the calluses of ranch work. "I was half alive before you came along. Just going through the motions, working myself into an early grave and calling it a life. You woke me up, Rosalie. You made me remember what it was to hope, to dream, to love." "Papa, you're being mushy again," Sam called out, but he was grinning. "That's because your mother makes me mushy," Grant called back. Someday you'll understand. Emma and Clara presented Rosalie with flower crowns, and she dutifully put one on, prompting giggles from the twins. Maddie demanded her own crown, and soon all the Fuller women were decorated with wildflowers. "Your turn, Papa," Clara announced, and before Grant could protest, she was crowning him with flowers too. They sat together on the hilltop, the whole family, watching the sun sink toward the horizon and paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The ranch spread out below them, the house and barn and corrals that represented years of hard work and dreams made real. "I never thanked you properly," Rosalie said suddenly. "For the $300, for taking a chance on a desperate stranger, for believing I was worth saving." "You don't need to thank me for that," Grant said. "You were always worth it. You just needed someone to show you." "Well, you showed me," Rosalie said. "Every single day for the past 7 years you've shown me. And I want you to know that I see it and I appreciate it, and I love you more than words can say." Grant leaned over and kissed her, careful not to dislodge her flower crown, while their children made exaggerated gagging noises. "I love you too," he murmured against her lips. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." As the sun set on the ranch, on their life, on all the years stretching ahead of them, Rosalie thought about the chains that had once bound her wrists. They were long gone, rusted to nothing or melted down for scrap. But their memory remained, a reminder of how far she'd come and how much she'd overcome. She'd arrived in California as no one's property, a woman without a place in the world. Now she was Rosalie Fuller, rancher's wife, mother of 4, beloved friend, respected member of her community. She was free in every sense of the word, living a life she'd chosen, not one forced upon her. And it had all started with a cowboy who saw a woman in chains and decided he couldn't walk away. Who broke those chains and gave her the greatest gift anyone could give, the freedom to choose her own path. She'd chosen him, chosen this life, chosen love, and she would make that choice every day for the rest of her life. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast California sky, the Fuller family made their way back down the hill toward home. Grant carried Maddie, who had fallen asleep on his shoulder. The twins held Rosalie's hands, chattering about their day. Sam walked ahead, already taking on the role of protective big brother. The house glowed with lamplight in the distance, warm and welcoming. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Rosalie could smell the dinner she'd left warming on the stove. It was a simple life in many ways, but it was theirs, built on love and trust and mutual respect. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Rosalie stood at her bedroom window looking out at the ranch. Grant came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy," he murmured. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Rosalie said, leaning back against his solid warmth. They stood there together in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over the hills, thinking about the past and the future and the present moment they were living in. The years continued to unfold with all their joys and challenges. The ranch prospered, growing into one of the most successful operations in the county. Sam grew into a fine young man, taking on more responsibility each year and showing a natural talent for ranching. The twins, Emma and Clara, were bright and spirited, eventually going to school in Sacramento but always returning home for holidays and summers. Maddie, the baby, turned out to have her father's hazel eyes and her mother's talent for sewing. In 1885, Sam met a girl at a church social in Placerville. Her name was Lucy, and she was the daughter of the town's doctor. Grant and Rosalie watched with amusement and affection as their son courted her with the same earnest determination his father had once shown. When Sam proposed and Lucy accepted, Grant pulled his son aside for a serious conversation about love and marriage and treating a woman right. "I learned from the best," Sam said simply, and Grant had to turn away to hide the emotion in his eyes. Sam and Lucy were married in 1886, and they built a small house on the ranch property, planning to help run the operation and eventually take it over when Grant and Rosalie were ready to step back. Lucy fit seamlessly into the family, and when she gave birth to a son the following year, making Grant and Rosalie grandparents for the first time, their joy was boundless. The twins eventually left for San Francisco, where they opened a dressmaking shop together, using the skills their mother had taught them. They wrote often, their letters full of excitement about city life and their growing business. Rosalie worried about them but was proud of their independence and ambition. Maddie, true to her name, stayed close to home. She married a neighboring rancher's son, a kind young man named Peter, and they settled on a property adjoining the Fuller Ranch. Rosalie delighted in having at least one daughter nearby, and the tradition of Sunday dinners at the main ranch house became sacred, with the whole extended family gathering to eat and talk and laugh together. In 1892, 20 years after that fateful day in Placerville, Grant and Rosalie celebrated their anniversary by returning to the hilltop where he'd proposed. They were both in their 50s now, gray-haired and weathered by decades of sun and wind, but their love had only grown stronger with time. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if I hadn't been in town that day?" Grant asked, his arm around Rosalie's waist as they looked out over the land that was so familiar and beloved. "I try not to," Rosalie admitted. "It's too frightening. I might have ended up trapped with Marcus Wendell, or I might have escaped only to end up alone and destitute somewhere else. Either way, I wouldn't have had this." She gestured to encompass the ranch, the life they'd built. "I wouldn't have had you." "I think about it sometimes," Grant confessed. "I think about what my life would be like without you, and it's just empty, gray and empty and meaningless. You brought color and joy and purpose to everything. You made me a better man." "We made each other better," Rosalie corrected gently. "That's what love does. It doesn't complete us, we were always complete on our own. But it enhances us, makes us braver and stronger and more ourselves than we could be alone." Grant pulled her close and kissed her temple. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from experience," Rosalie said with a smile. 20 years of marriage to you has taught me a lot." They stayed on the hilltop until sunset, watching the sky blaze with color, holding each other close. 2 decades had passed since chains had bound Rosalie's wrists and a cowboy had broken them. 2 decades of love and laughter, of hard work and simple pleasures, of children raised and dreams realized. The chains were gone, but their legacy remained not as a symbol of bondage but as a reminder of freedom. Freedom to choose to love, to live authentically. Grant had given Rosalie that freedom when he'd said, "You're no one's property." And she'd taken that gift and built a life beyond anything she'd imagined. As they walked back down the hill hand in hand, the same way they had so many times before, Rosalie felt a profound sense of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. Her life hadn't been easy, but it had been hers. She'd made choices, good and bad, and learned from all of them. She'd loved deeply and been loved in return. She'd raised children and built a home and created something lasting and meaningful. That night, surrounded by their family at Sunday dinner, with grandchildren playing underfoot and adult children sharing stories of their lives, Rosalie looked at Grant across the table and knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't change a single thing. Every hardship, every challenge, every moment of fear and doubt had led her here, to this moment, to this life, to this love. Grant caught her eye and smiled, that same warm smile that had first made her heart skip 20 years ago. She smiled back, and in that exchange, entire conversations were held. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for choosing me. I love you. I'll always love you." The years continued to pass. Sam took over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Grant and Rosalie to slow down and enjoy their grandchildren. The twins' business in San Francisco flourished, and they returned home often with tales of their adventures in the city. Maddie and Peter expanded their ranch and had 3 children who spent as much time at their grandparents' house as their own. In 1897, a young reporter from Sacramento came to interview Grant for an article about successful California ranchers. During the interview, the reporter asked how Grant had gotten his start. "I bought the land with money I saved from the war," Grant said. "Built it up slowly over the years, but the real success of this ranch came when I met my wife." The reporter, intrigued, asked Rosalie if she'd care to share her story. Rosalie hesitated, then decided that perhaps her experience could help others. She told the whole tale: the desperate decision to become a mail-order bride, Marcus Wendell's deception, the chains, Grant breaking them and declaring she was no one's property. "It's a powerful story," the reporter said when she finished. "About cruelty and redemption, about one person's courage changing another's life." "It's about more than that," Rosalie said thoughtfully. "It's about recognizing the humanity in others, about refusing to stand by when you see injustice. Grant could have walked away. Most people did. But he chose to act, to help, to give me a chance at freedom. That choice changed both our lives." The article was published in several California newspapers, and Rosalie received letters from women all over the state, thanking her for sharing her story. Some were mail-order brides themselves. Others were women in difficult circumstances looking for hope. Rosalie answered each letter personally, offering encouragement and practical advice. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Grant and Rosalie celebrated their 50th anniversary of meeting, not their wedding anniversary, but the anniversary of that day in Placerville when their lives had intersected and changed forever. The whole family gathered for a massive celebration at the ranch, with neighbors and friends coming from miles around. Grant, now 65 and finally showing his age, stood to make a toast. "50 years ago," he said, his voice strong despite the years, "I saw a woman in chains and I couldn't walk away. It was the best decision I ever made. Rosalie, you've given me everything: love, family, purpose, joy. You've made my life worth living. Here's to 50 more years of memories." "I'll drink to that," Rosalie said, raising her glass. At 60, she was still vibrant and engaged, her hair silver now but her blue eyes as bright as ever. "Though I think the math might not work in our favor." The crowd laughed, and the party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren ran wild while adults reminisced about the past and made plans for the future. Later, when the guests had gone home and the family had retired to bed, Grant and Rosalie sat on their porch watching the stars. The same porch where they'd courted so many years ago, where they'd made plans and dreamed dreams and built a life together. "No regrets?" Grant asked softly. "Not a single one," Rosalie said firmly. "You?" "Only that I didn't meet you sooner," Grant said. "That we didn't have more time." "We have all the time we need," Rosalie assured him. "Quality matters more than quantity, and the quality of our time together has been extraordinary." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the night sky. After 50 years together, they didn't need constant conversation. They were comfortable in silence, secure in their love, content in their shared life. Grant Fuller passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1902 at the age of 67. It was sudden and unexpected, a heart attack that took him without warning or pain. Rosalie was devastated by the loss but grateful that he hadn't suffered, that he'd died in his own bed surrounded by the ranch he'd loved. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, a testament to the respect and affection Grant had earned over his years in California. Rosalie stood strong through the service, supported by her children and grandchildren, accepting condolences with grace. But at night, alone in the bed they'd shared for 30 years, she grieved. She missed him with an ache that was physical, missed his laugh and his touch and his steady presence. The ranch felt empty without him, even though it was still full of family and activity. Sam worried about his mother, but Rosalie reassured him that she would be all right. "Grief is the price we pay for love," she told him, "and it was worth it. Every moment with your father was worth whatever pain I feel now." She stayed on at the ranch, helping Sam and Lucy, doting on her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, keeping busy with her sewing and her correspondence with the women who still wrote to her seeking advice. She found purpose in helping others, in being there for her family, in preserving Grant's legacy. Rosalie Fuller lived to the remarkable age of 82, passing away in 1919, 17 years after her beloved husband. In those final years, she'd seen the world change dramatically: automobiles replacing horses, electricity coming to rural areas, women finally winning the right to vote. She'd lived through war and change and progress, always adapting but never forgetting where she'd come from. On her deathbed, surrounded by 3 generations of descendants, Rosalie's last coherent words were about Grant. "Tell him I'm coming," she murmured. "Tell him I kept my promise. I chose him every day." She was buried next to Grant on the hilltop they'd loved, the spot where he'd proposed and where they'd spent so many quiet moments together. Her headstone reads simply, "Rosalie Fuller, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She was no one's property but everyone's inspiration." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from Sam to his children and their children after them. The story of how Grant and Rosalie met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder of where they'd come from and the values they held dear. In 1972, exactly 100 years after Rosalie had arrived in Placerville in chains, the family erected a small monument on the property. It depicted a pair of broken shackles and bore an inscription, "In memory of Grant and Rosalie Fuller. He saw injustice and acted. She survived and thrived." Together they built a legacy of love and freedom. Their story lived on, passed down through the years, inspiring new generations to stand up for what's right, to help those in need, to believe in second chances and the transformative power of love. It was a reminder that one moment of courage, one choice to do the right thing, could change not just one life but many, rippling out through time in ways impossible to predict. Grant Fuller had spent $300 and gained a life partner, a love story for the ages, and a legacy that would last long after he was gone. Rosalie Lambert had arrived in California as no one's property and left it as her own woman, having lived a full and meaningful life on her own terms. And it all started with chains breaking and a cowboy saying the words she'd needed to hear. "You're no one's property." Those words echoed through generations, a declaration of human dignity and worth that transcended their specific time and place. They represented everything Grant and Rosalie's life together had stood for: respect, equality, love freely given rather than demanded, partnership rather than ownership. In the end, their story was simple but profound. 2 people met by chance, connected by kindness, and built something beautiful together. They loved deeply, worked hard, raised a family, and left the world a little better than they found it. It was everything a life should be, everything a love story should be. And it all came from one man seeing a woman in need and deciding he couldn't walk away, and one woman choosing to trust again despite every reason not to. The Fuller Ranch still stands in California, still run by descendants of Grant and Rosalie, still a testament to what two people can build when they approach life as partners. And on that hilltop where Grant proposed so long ago, if you visit at sunset, you can almost hear echoes of laughter and see shadows of two people standing hand in hand, looking out over the land they loved, living proof that freedom, love, and second chances can change everything. Their story ended not with death but with legacy, not with endings but with new beginnings in each generation that followed. Grant and Rosalie Fuller lived, loved, and left behind something that mattered. They showed that one moment of courage and compassion could transform two lives and create ripples that would spread through time. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, they were together again, those chains long forgotten, nothing between them but love and the infinite promise of eternity. No one's property but each other's partners, forever and always, exactly as it should be.